Okay, hello everyone. This is part 2 of Discourses of Epictetus I'm using the Robin Hard version. I think the other guys are too. Travis, Judith, and Charlene is here, and Jody's just arriving. So isn't that nice? So we'll just wait a second while she comes in. But basically what we've been doing, Charlene, is one person reads one of the chapters, and then we discuss it, and then someone else reads, and then we discuss it. Last time we got through 3, I think. And hello, Jody.
Hello, everyone.
Long time no see.
Finally made it. Hi, Charlene. Good to see you. Travis, Judy, Courtney. Yeah,
Hey.
I've had a
Hey, how are you?
busy January. Gosh, it's gone a bit crazy. Yes, I'm glad to have made it tonight. It's wonderful.
So good that you're here. Well, I was just telling everyone what was going on. So basically, this is the second one. We're at 1.4, and I'm happy to read the first one, and then someone can read the second one. The first one's a little bit long, so I was trying to get an idea of how to break it up. I'm still undecided if that's the right way to do it or not, but I found a couple of natural breaks, so I'll just jump in and see how we go. How's that sound? So 1.4 on progress. One who is making progress, having learned from the philosophers that desire has good things for its object and aversion bad things, and having also learned that serenity and freedom from passion can be achieved only by one who is neither frustrated in his desires nor falls into what he wants to avoid, such a person, then, has rid himself of desire altogether and put it aside for the present, and feels aversion only towards those things that lie within the sphere of choice. For if he tries to avoid anything that lies outside the sphere of choice, he knows that he'll run into some such thing one day, in spite of the aversion that he feels for it, and so be unhappy. Now, if virtue promises to enable us to achieve happiness, freedom from passion, and serenity, then progress towards virtue is surely also progress towards each of these states. For it is invariably the case that whatever the end may be towards which perfection in anything definitely leads, progress marks an approach towards that end. How does it come about, then, that when we agree that virtue is something of this kind, we seek and display progress elsewhere? What does virtue achieve for us? Serenity. Who is making progress then? Someone who has read many treatises by Chrysippus? For if that is the case, virtue assuredly consists in nothing else than in having gained a knowledge of Chrysippus. As things are, then, while acknowledging that virtue achieves one result, we're yet declaring that the approach to virtue, namely progress, produces another. That person, someone says, is able to read Chrysippus on his own. By the gods, man, you're making excellent progress. What wonderful progress! Why are you making fun of him? And you, why are you diverting him from an awareness of his own failings? Aren't you willing to show him what virtue achieves, so that he may learn where to look for progress? Look for it, wretch, where your proper task lies. And where is that? In desire and aversion, so that you may neither fail to attain what you desire, nor fall into what you want to avoid. In motivation to act or not to act, so that you may not go wrong in that, and in assent and the withholding of assent, so that you may not be deceived. The first 2 areas of study come first as the most essential, but if you're still afraid and trembling as you seek to avoid falling into what you want to avoid, how, I ask, can you make any progress? Come now, show me what progress you're making in this regard. Suppose I were talking with an athlete and said, "Show me his shoulders," and he were to reply, "Look at my jumping weights." That's quite enough of you and your jumping weights. What I want to see is what you've achieved by use of these jumping weights. Take the treatise on motivation and see how thoroughly I've read it. That's not what I'm seeking to know, slave, but how you're exercising your motives to act and not to act, and how you're managing your desires and aversions, and how you're approaching all this, and how you're applying yourself to it and preparing for it, and whether in harmony with nature or out of harmony with it. If in harmony, give me evidence of that, and I'll tell you whether you're making progress. But if out of harmony, go away, and don't be satisfied merely to interpret those books, but also write some books of that kind yourself. And what good will that do you? Don't you know that the whole book costs only 5 denarii? So do you suppose that someone who interprets it is worth more than 5 denarii? Never look for your work in one place then, and your progress in another. We'll have a break there, because I think that contains most of the first part of the idea. Any initial thoughts? I think this one is fairly consistent throughout. It's got a sort of fairly central theme.
Yeah, so I think he's trying to make clear what's involved with making progress. And for the Procopton, the one who is attempting to improve. And he concludes it's about desire and aversion. It's not about just acquiring knowledge of the readings, because you can read all of Chrysippus' works, which they were lucky enough to be able to do. Of course, we can't do that. But it's how the person's absorbed Chrysippus and used Chrysippus' works to improve his own performance in desires and aversions. And so that's the only place to look for progress, not in other places.
Yeah, that's right. And it's nicely sort of spelt out. Virtue is the only goal, and virtue gives us certain benefits: happiness, freedom from passion, and serenity, he says. So we will know if we are making progress towards virtue, because surely it's the same thing as progress with each of those states, he says. So we'll be happier, won't we? We'll be more serene. And we should know then that well, what he's saying is it's strange that if that's where we should be making progress, isn't it bizarre that we've made this category error? We think making progress is in getting good at reading certain kinds of books. Well, no, it's not. It's about making progress with happiness and freedom from passion and serenity and those sorts of things that are indicative of getting closer to virtue. And what do you think there? I mean, it's almost obvious, but it's not that obvious, I think. What do you think is really meant by desire and aversion? Like, for example, to me, and I think Pierre Hadot says this, and it's probably fairly obvious, but it still makes me kind of marvel at these things. Desire is really a longing for a wish that hasn't come true yet. And there's no guarantee that wish will be fulfilled even. So to live with desire in your heart means to live as if there's a wish that hasn't been fulfilled in your life. And that constantly eats away at you, especially when it's a wish that's outside of your control. So I think it's even in the really small things where Stoicism is really remarkable, because it gets you to rethink these basic human motivations, like what is appropriately desired and what is appropriately avoided.
I always would feel that he would, that, you know, the true Stoic view of desire and aversion is always comes back to the self, you know, the therapy of the self, and those aspects of the self that need to be trained and brought into line with correct reason. So it's really about desiring or making progress in, I would think, making progress in desiring the correct things, which is only based in the self and what you're doing in yourself and not externals. And also with aversion, the same, you know, the opposite of that would be to not be wanting to fail or to miss the mark or to use wrong reasoning or go into error, just to avoid error, basically. But we have a broader view in our day-to-day life of desire and aversion, but I think his view is brought back to the governance of the self, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And he clearly says that as we start with this practice, because this desire or this longing for the wish to be fulfilled, whatever that is such a problem from the outset, then we should bracket it out and put it aside altogether. So we should aim to have no desires for unrealized things, things that aren't necessarily going to come our way, and like you say, Jody, aren't within our sphere of choice, don't belong directly to our own use of our faculties, for example. And also the same with aversion. We should only have aversion for things that lie within our sphere of choice, as opposed to those often uncomfortable or difficult things that happen in life that have nothing to do with our ability to have power over that situation or not. Because the only power we have over it, obviously, is whether or not we shrink away from it or embrace it for what it is, just an opportunity to exercise reason.
I've just been looking at the Greek in section 11, and it makes you realize that as some scholars consider, Epictetus is kind of superficially easy to understand, but when you actually get into the nitty-gritty, it's quite complex and quite it really requires a lot of thought. So the Greek in section 11 is really quite complex. So he says in the hard translation, look for a wretch where your proper task lies. So he's saying wretch, he's actually abusing the person he's talking to, because he thinks the students aren't really acting appropriately at this stage. And where is that? In desire and aversion, in orexe kai eklise, hin anexapatetos, so that you may not fail to attain what you desire. So we have all these English words to express that one Greek word. It's really kind of it's complex. It's a complex thought, but it should be simple in the sense that it should be a simple matter to us to recognize where our desires and aversions should be. So in a sense, it's kind of very meta, there's a complex way of saying it, but at the bottom line, it should be relatively simple, and the better trained we are, the simpler it should be around bringing our desires and aversions into harmony with nature.
Would you say, even though the language is different, clearly, that sort of existentially we should be able to deduce what's going on, because we all have a sense of ourselves where we're going wrong in this sort of manner by desiring things that obviously we can't control the outcomes of, and things like that?
I think so. And then in section 12, he stresses the first two areas of study come first as the most essential. So he's kind of underlining really here. Protoi desin hoi protoi topoi kai anankai ototoi. They're the most, anankai ototoi translated as most essential means the ones connected with necessity, the ones the most needful. So he's very clear on that. And I thought it was a very interesting rhetorical question in section 12 there. But if you're still afraid and trembling as you seek to avoid falling into what you want to avoid, how I ask, can you make any progress? So he's saying that we need to be courageous in approaching these matters. You know, it doesn't do to hold back. You've got to get in there and address these matters rather than being very anxious about it, or too anxious to actually do it. So he's pushing his listener or his reader towards engaging in these matters of desire and aversion.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, these are the three disciplines of the soul. And this is interesting then, because what he's really saying is, of these three disciplines of the soul, there's the first two areas which are really the most essential. And I assume that means where we should start first. And he's saying well, obviously the first two are desire and aversion, so that you may neither fail to attain what you desire nor fall into what you want to avoid. And that's got a lot in it already, right? Because desire and aversion, Pierre Hadot says, has something to do with the cosmic perspective. It's got to do with the kind of soul that we have and the way in which that kind of soul orients to impressions, for example. And then the second part is horme, right? In motivation to act or not to act, so that you may not go wrong in that. Now that's interesting. So, you know, I'm curious about what Judith and you guys think about the difference between desire and then horme, like the motivation, the act, which often has a social component, right? And that those two things are the more important or more essential aspect before the thing that most people actually tend to focus on in the modern world, which is assent and withholding assent, which is the judgment side of it. So it's the view that you have first and the motivation that you have, kind of fundamental view, before the actual learning how to use logic and kind of do the analytical nitpicking, or like the cognitive behavioral therapist would kind of emphasize, for example.
Yeah, it's a real elevation of the practical, even ahead of the of what we might think was pretty basic, which is in assent and the withholding of assent. You know, he's basically saying just get in there and get started. You know, and I guess that's where the image that comes up in 13 about the athlete and his weights. You know, we don't want to see the weights. We want to see the man who's used the weights and improved his strength with them. We want to see that, not the vehicle or the means. We want to see the results. You know, we want to see the action in a sense.
Brilliant. So I guess in summary, what he said so far is, look, young guys, you came here to learn about virtue. Virtue is really, we know we're making progress in virtue because you'll start to feel more happy and free from passion and serene and those sorts of things. So don't fixate on how many books you can read and how well you can translate or interpret Chrysippus, because that's not really the point. That's got nothing to do with virtue at all. And part of this, Sellers makes the comment in his book on Stoicism that Epictetus one of the reasons potentially that there was a decline in Stoicism after Epictetus was that he was so successful at pushing this message about, you know, virtue is a philosophy as a way of life, is a practical, and so practical philosophy emphasizes the actual living of it rather than the reading and interpretation of books and discussing books. I don't know. What do you think about that, guys? I think that's an interesting point. John Sellers makes it as a kind of hypothesis. No one? No takers?
No, not entirely convinced. Like, I understand the thought process behind it, but for me, it's also a case of there still needs to be something written down that you can transmit through the ages. And perhaps it was a case where they were thinking that it was just going to be an oral form of teaching of philosophy, but there seems to be an indication here around people writing things down. So it would make sense that you would have some type of manual or thought process that you can then have that's discussed, but then you still take the action to do rather than just reading every volume of Chrysippus or Epictetus that you can get your hand on, but still actually going and putting that into play.
All right, great. I'll tear ahead. So where is progress to be found? If any of you turns away from external things to concentrate his efforts on his own power of choice, to cultivate it and perfect it, so as to bring it into harmony with nature, raising it up and rendering it free, unhindered, unobstructed, trustworthy, and self-respecting, and if he has come to understand that whoever longs for things that are not within his power or seeks to avoid them can neither be trustworthy nor free, but must necessarily be subject to change and be tossed in all directions along with those things, and is inevitably placing himself under the domination of other people, namely those who can secure or prevent such things. And if finally, when he gets up in the morning, he holds in mind what he has learned and keeps true to it, if he bathes as a trustworthy person and eats as a self-respecting person, putting his guiding principles into action in relation to anything that he has to deal with, just as a runner does in the practice of running, or a voice trainer in the training of voices. This then is the person who is truly making progress. This is the person who hasn't traveled in vain. But if he has directed his efforts to what is contained in books, and that is what he toils away at, and it was for that he has traveled abroad, I would ask him to return home at once and no longer neglect his affairs there, because he has made his journey for no purpose. No, what is truly worthwhile is to study how to rid one's life of distress and lamentation, and of cries of, "Ah, what sorrow is mine," and "Poor wretch that I am," and of misfortune and adversity, and to learn what death, banishment, prison, and hemlock really are, so that one may be able to say in prison, like Socrates, "My dear Crito, if it pleases the gods that this should come about, so be it," rather than, "Alas, poor old man that I am, this is what was kept in store for my gray hairs." Who speaks in such terms? Do you think that I'll mention some obscure man of humble origin? Doesn't Priam talk like that? Doesn't Oedipus? Is there indeed any king who doesn't? For what else is tragedy than the portrayal in tragic verse of the sufferings of men who have attached high value to external things? If one has to be deceived into learning that external things that lie outside the sphere of choice are nothing to us, I, for my part, would willingly undergo such deception, if it would enable me to live a life of undisturbed serenity from that time onward. But as to what you wish for, it is for you to look to them. No, you to look to that. What does Chrysippus offer us then? So that you may know, he says, that those thoughts are not false from which serenity comes to us and freedom from passions. Take my books, and you will know that they are true and in harmony with nature, the thoughts that render me free from passion. Oh, what great good fortune! And how great is the benefactor who shows us the way! People everywhere have raised shrines and altars to Triptolemus, or having given us cultivated crops for our nourishment. But to him who discovered and brought to light and communicated to all the truth that enables us not merely to keep alive, but to live a good life, who among you has ever raised an altar in his honor, or a temple or a statue, or bows down to God to thank him for this benefaction? For having granted us corn or the vine, we offer up sacrifices to the gods, and yet when they have brought forth such a wonderful fruit in the human mind, by setting out to reveal to us the truth about happiness, shall we fail to offer thanks to God for that? And that's the end of that one.
That's a very dramatic ending, isn't it? Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, it's we've just read Seneca letter 64, and Courtney was there when we were doing it the other day, and Seneca talks about how he has personal little shrines to great philosophers. And so this is exactly what Epictetus is talking about. You know, everybody raises statues to Triptolemus, who I think was the son of Demeter. Anyway, he was somehow connected with Demeter and Persephone and the whole fruitful crop cult, because people are very grateful for fruitful crops. But as Epictetus points out to us, well, shouldn't we be grateful for someone like Chrysippus, who has given us the means to overcome suffering or worry and anxiety, and allowed us to achieve serenity if we look at it in the correct way? It's a powerful argument.
Yeah, definitely. And I just love the way in which he presents the ordinary activity of, you know, just about everybody, and how desiring external things, the things that we assume bring success in life and status and popularity and wealth and all those good things, basically, quite obviously, can lead to an undermining of moral character. See, he says, whoever longs for things that are not within his power or seeks to avoid them can neither be trustworthy nor free. And there's a very strong link in Stoicism between, like, the trustworthy part, I presumably is the moral character part, and his freedom and his autonomy. It's really important that people recognize that there's a central core in all of this that is really instructing us to find our internal causal part that allows us to be free and to operate as an integrity, as our own part in the world, free from external causes, for example. I think that's a really important point. And you can see here, if you don't do that, if you abandon your capacity to be autonomous, then you'll be tossed around by things. You'll be disturbed. You'll be dominated by other people, namely because you have this great power already to decide on the value of things, and you've decided to place that ability to value things on things that you can't possibly have. So that leads to disturbance, psychological disturbance. And that's why it's being out of touch with reality or nature, because those things just can't belong to you in the first place, you know.
I see the strong a word that comes to me strongly here in that section there from 18 through to 21, that part you were just referring to, Courtney, is that consistency that we need. You know, the consistent, that unfailing, steady peace. You know.
Yeah, and it's eminently practical, right? It's done as a person who bathes, who eats, who talks to others.
Yeah, it's related to every activity during our day, right? It's to do with everything we do, whether it's having a meal or going to the gym or whatever. It's all got to be coherent as a self-respecting person. It's very powerful, I think.
Yeah, and also coherence. Yeah, coherence. That's another great word, Judith.
And he makes reference at 25 and 26, and it's really powerful, I think, here, where he points out that Greek tragedy, that great Greek art form, he strips it back the way Marcus would do about other things. He strips it right back to essentials, and he says, well, what else is tragedy than the portrayal in tragic verse of the sufferings of men, and they're very powerful men, they're kings, who have attached high value to external things. That there is Greek tragedy. He's summed it up and pretty well dismissed it because the people involved have lived in such a way that they have put value on things that they had no control over, and that's your driver of your plot, and that's your tragedy in a sense, is this disvaluing of the what's right and the excessive valuing of what's indifferent.
And there's a kind of irony at play there, because what he's saying is, you, a normal person, not a king, can die like Socrates with that sort of nobility, or you can be this miserable, wretched old man who in that, the way he puts it, just sounds like some poor old man who's, you know, weak and sort of a victim of circumstance. But then he says, no, I'm not just talking about any old man. I'm talking about the kings. I'm talking about Priam and Oedipus, because that's how they died. They died wailing over these sorts of things. So, and that reminds me of Boethius in Consolations of Philosophy, because he's saying, you know, I don't envy those with power and wealth and that, because they have a powerless power. And all these trappings of external power abandon us right when we need them, when we're in exile, when we're being faced with death, when we're being faced with hemlock and things like that. Who would like to read the next one? Oh, sorry, you go, Travis.
I was going to say, I really enjoyed 18 to 21 in this reading. It's kind of one of my favorite things, because to me, it puts forward the idea of we actually have to make a conscious choice in what it is that we're going to do. Like, we have to decide the type of person that we want to be. And hopefully it is going to be that person that is that self-respecting person that puts things into practice. Otherwise, our time and attention is going to get taken away from us, and we will get distracted by those around us. And it puts a bit of a plug in there too, I think, around who we choose to spend our time with. Because if we want to be, you know, a good runner, well, then you have to not only practice your art form, but you want a trainer. Similarly with the voice trainer, it's around getting that practicing, getting that feedback. So making sure that we're getting the guidance in that right direction so we can put it into practice and play each day. Like, it's, I really, really like that section.
And before we move on then, what did you think about this? There's a bit of a cheeky jibe about book writing and academics and stuff. He was saying, look, if you're not going to go out there and live this philosophy, then you might as well just bugger off and write a book about it.
But yeah, then he says, oh, that's back at 17, you know, 16, you know how much the books cost, right? It means you're not going to get much money for them anyway. It's so brilliant. 5 denarii, although 5 denarii was an awful lot of money, right? I mean, books are very expensive, but he points out that yeah, that's all you're going to get out of it. So yeah, that's really funny.
I was going to say though about the books, like the altar to the, you know, to the great thinkers, aren't our altars our bookshelves? You know, I think that's, I mean, that's my pride and joy. Like, looking at my bookshelf, I'm like, yeah, there's my altar.
Yeah, I think you're right, Charlene. Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're our mentors in some way. Like, if I want to eat better, like, I'm going to read a book and then choose part of that and put it into practice. If I just, you know, did my own thing, I'd probably just smash donuts and think I'm pretty good. Like, you've got, I think there is some utility, but I agree with the fact that you can't just be reading and espousing information if you're not actually doing anything about it. But yeah, love the place of books though.
Yeah, I agree, but I think he's even goes a lot further than that, because my understanding of Triptolemus is he's the guy who introduced grain to the Athenians, right? So he's putting this sort of knowledge up there with the fact that you can eat food, you know, that you've got a full belly. He's like, this is not a trifling matter. This is something of the most greatest importance. It's a gift from God. And yeah, in a way, like you say, Charlene, I agree with you, but we've made it kitschy. We've got cute little bookshelves with, probably next to my Plato is a book on Hello Kitty or something. I don't know, you know. Shall we someone read the next one?
I'm happy to if no one wants to. Okay, I'll start. 1.5, against the academics. If someone, says Epictetus, and that's a reminder that we're getting Arian's version here, so that's a good reminder there. If someone, says Epictetus, refuses to accept that what is patently obvious, it is not easy to find arguments to use against him that could cause him to change his mind. And the reason for this lies neither in his own strength nor in the weakness of the one who is trying to instruct him. But the fact is that when someone who has been driven into a corner turns to stone, how can one hope to deal with him any further through argument? Petrifaction of this kind takes two forms, the one being a petrifaction of the intellect and the other of moral feeling. When someone who is in the line of battle is willing neither to grant assent to what is plainly obvious nor to withdraw from the fray. Most of us fear the deadening of the body and would resort to every means to avoid falling into such a state. But when it comes to the deadening of the soul, we're not the least concerned. And if by Zeus, with regard to the soul itself, someone falls into such a state as to be incapable of following or understanding any argument, we think that he is in a bad way. But if someone's moral feeling and sense of shame are deadened, we even go so far as to call that strength of mind. Do you recognize that you're awake? No, replies the academic, no more than when in my dreams I have the impression of being awake. Is there no difference at all then between the one impression and the other? None. How can I argue with this man any further? What fire, what steel can I apply to him to make him realize that he has become deadened? If he does realize, he pretends not to. He's even worse than a corpse. One man doesn't see the contradiction. He's in a bad state. This man, by contrast, sees it, but isn't moved and doesn't improve. He is in an even worse state. His sense of shame and moral feeling have been completely excised, and his faculty of reason, if not excised, has been brutalized at any rate. Am I to call this strength of mind? Heaven forbid, unless I am also to apply that description to the quality that enables degenerates to do and say in public whatever comes into their heads. Well, what a very interesting passage this is. And it's very relevant to our other reading, Descartes, right? So Descartes is one of these academics, one of these skeptics who is insisting on taking a certain position that's kind of contrary to common sense. I think what Epictetus is getting at here, it's really, really interesting. And I think we all have experienced it, maybe in social media, where we've come across someone who is just denying what essentially is right there obvious. And as he says, there are two aspects of it. One of them is intellectual, the other one's moral. And so you come across people who have all kinds of arguments to deal with what's essentially a pretty straightforward moral position. And then you've got to just say, well, what can I do with this person? And the answer is, well, not very much. But I'm really interested to see what people think of this passage.
A very obvious argument, it seems to me, would be a kind of common one you come across with this kind of very weakly based evolutionary kind of thing to it, where people say things like, well, you know, it's a dog eat dog world out there, and so I've developed a fairly aggressive and competitive attitude, and that's the way I was constructed by nature, so that I can you know, get the resources that I need to be successful and healthy. Fuck everyone else, basically. I've got to pass my genes on to whichever willing or unwilling poor person that wants to, you know. And that's kind of what he's saying here, right? He's like, how can we even call that strength of mind? You know, that is just brutalization of the moral sense, you know. But some people nowadays especially kind of put these ideas all over the internet, and people call it a very manly attitude or an excellent attitude or kind of like leadership quality stuff or whatever, you know. And I guess that brings me back to the idea, as I think I said to Charlene earlier today, is I'm often thinking about as an alternative to these sort of very hyper masculine kind of philosophies, and we need a philosophy of care where identifies that caring for one another and building community and all those sorts of things is actually the equivalent of caring for oneself, and that is truly, it seems to Epictetus to be obvious, but also it speaks of good moral health, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting that, so I think it's subtitled here, Against the Academics. Now, I don't know whether that's something that later editors have put there, you know, kind of conjecturing who Epictetus's target is here. But the academics were kind of skeptics, but sort of moderate skeptics, I would say, and Cicero falls into that category. So he seems to be arguing against skepticism, because he says, where does he say? Oh yeah, in section 6, do you recognize that you're awake? No, replies the academic. Well, that's literally what Descartes does. No, no more than when in my dreams I have the impression of being awake. Is there no difference at all between the one impression and the other? None. And then Epictetus just says, well, how can I argue with this person any longer? You can't argue with a person who is so wedded to the idea that there is nothing guaranteed about any sense impression or any impression at all. So it's kind of a very interesting approach to these skeptical arguments. We are kind of left a bit at a loss when somebody can't even distinguish between when they're sleeping or awake. What can you say to such a person?
It's a really good point, especially in relation to our reading of Descartes, because if you remember too, when Descartes does that dream exercise where he says, well, I could be dreaming, it could be a demon that's you know, caused me to be in this dream, and everything is uncertain. And then the problem there is he comes up with an alternative view of the mind, completely different what Aristotle had and people had before, one in which a body doesn't need to exist for the mind to go about its business. And we discussed that about how prior models of mind had the activities of the soul being embedded in physical activities and the like, right? And so by doing this sort of skeptical exercise, Descartes makes the body disappear. And in making the body disappear, there's actual repercussions which potentially damage one's moral kind of connection to the life world around them. And that's kind of what the phenomenologists sort of or whoever, those who critique the Cartesian perspective are constantly concerned about the damage that rampant scientific objectivism has done to man's place in the world, for example. And it's kind of here, it's suggested already here by Epictetus that this is what goes wrong when you ignore the obvious, that we have a moral concern for one another, for example.
Yeah, and it's really interesting where he says in section 7, how can I make this person realize he's become deadened? The Greek is actually to nekru, that's a corpse. You know, he's literally saying that the person who thinks in this way has literally become like a corpse. And so how do you argue with a corpse? It's really interesting. And as you say, Courtney, it's got these phenomenological aspects.
Anything else, or would someone like to read 1.6 on Providence? You might have to find a natural break in that one because it's
I'm happy to have a read. That'd be lovely. I wouldn't mind.
Go for it, Jody. think you got stuck, Jody.
Okay. Oh,
Well, that did not go well at all. Charlene. She probably doesn't have the book in front of her. Or shall we wait for Jody to appear again?
Or
I
Travis,
do have the book. I've just been talking all day, as you know, and have been sick, so I'd prefer not to talk.
well, Travis, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, I can do it.
Awesome.
Yeah. From everything that comes about in the universe, one may easily find cause to praise Providence if one possesses these two qualities: the capacity to view each particular event in relation to the whole, and a sense of gratitude. For otherwise, one will either fail to recognize the usefulness of what has come about, or else fail to be truly grateful if one does in fact recognize it. If God had created colors without also having created the faculty of vision, what good would that have served? None at all. Conversely, if he had created the faculty of vision without causing objects to be of such a nature as to be visible to it, what good would have been served in that case too? None. Or again, if he had brought about these two things but hadn't created light, in that case too, no good would have been served. Who is it then who has adapted one thing to another? Who has adapted the sword to the scabbard and the scabbard to the sword? Can it be no one? And yet from the very structure of such artifacts, we're accustomed to recognize that they're undoubtedly the work of some maker, rather than being mere products of chance. Does each of the works reveal its maker then, while visible objects and vision and light do not? And male and female, and the desire that they have for intercourse with one another, and the power that they have to make use of the organs that have been constructed for that purpose, do these things not reveal their maker either? Surely they do. This remarkable constitution of our mind, which enables us not only to receive impressions from sensible objects when they act upon us, but also to choose certain impressions from among them, and subtract from them, and add to them, and so make various combinations, and also, by Zeus, substitute some for others which are in some way related to them. Can it really be the case that even this isn't enough to move some people and make them change their ideas so as to make allowance for the maker? Or otherwise, let them explain what it is that brings all of this about, or how it is possible that such wonders that bear all the signs of workmanship could come into being by chance and of their own accord. Well now, is it in us human beings alone that these things come about? Many indeed in us alone, those of which the rational animal has a special need, but you'll find that we may share many of them with the irrational animals too. Is it the case then that they too understand how things come about? No, not at all, since use is one thing and understanding is another. God has need both of these creatures, which merely make use of impressions, and of ourselves, who understand the use of them. For them, it is enough merely to eat, drink, take rest, and procreate, and perform such other functions as are appropriate to each. Whereas for ourselves, who have been further endowed with the faculty of understanding, there is no longer enough. But unless we act in a methodical and orderly fashion, and in accordance with our own specific nature and constitution, we shall no longer attain our proper end. For insofar as beings have different constitutions, their works and their ends will differ too. So where a being's constitution is adapted for use alone, mere use suffices. But where a being also has the capacity to understand that use, unless that capacity be properly exercised in addition, he will never attain his end. What of the animals? God has constituted each according to its intended purpose, one to be eaten, another to be used in the fields, another to produce cheese, and another for some comparable use. And to be able to perform these functions, How is it necessary for them to be able to understand impressions and be capable of distinguishing between them? But God has brought the human race into the world to be a spectator of himself and his works, and not merely to observe them, but also to interpret them. It is thus shameful for a human being to begin and end where the irrational animals do. Rather, he should start off where they do and end where nature ended with regard to ourselves. Now it ended with contemplation and understanding, and a way of life that is in harmony with nature. Take care, then, that you don't die without having contemplated these realities.
That would be a good break. So, what do we think about that? It's pretty cryptic in parts, maybe.
Well, it's kind of a classical argument from design there in the first few sections. You know, we have all these elaborate arrangements, and something that I think we've come across in various articles and so on about the evolution of things like vision and color having happened in sync with each other, so that, for instance, well, something we also see is the sort of convergent evolution of insects and flowers, right? So these things have all developed in order to work together. There's a great arrangement and fitting of things to each other that Epictetus is drawing attention to here. He even uses the expression who then has adapted one thing to another. You know, this idea of adaptation is present in this passage. Can it be no one, he asks in section 6. And yet from the very structure of these artifacts, we're accustomed to recognize that they're undoubtedly the work of some maker rather than being mere products of chance. So that's a classical kind of argument from design. And he goes on to explain that we have this remarkable gift, the way our minds are shaped and created, that we get impressions from things that operate on us through our senses, and we can make judgments about it and make various combinations and substitute some for others which in some way related to them. So we can see parallels, we can see metaphors. He's explaining what our powers involve. So he suggests in section 11, or otherwise let them, that's people who don't consider that there's any design involved here, let them explain what it is that brings all of this about, or how it is possible that such wonders that bear all the signs of workmanship could come into being by chance and of their own accord. And of course, his main target there would be the Epicureans, who regard everything as come into place by chance. But of course, you know, the argument is just as operative nowadays, I would say, with people who insist that arguments from design are primitive and irrelevant. I think arguments from design are still quite powerful and useful, if nothing else, in getting us to think about these things.
Yeah, that's great. And right at the beginning, underpinning the first, activity of the soul or discipline of the soul, is this sort of underlies that activity of desiring and desire and aversion, is the capacity to view each particular event in relation to the whole. So that's a fundamental attitude that a person has to be able to have, and a sense of gratitude. So that goes into, yeah, all the rest of it. So to see the world that way naturally includes seeing the design of the world and the maker's mark on everything. And that idea of, like you said, Judith, it enables us not only to receive impressions when they act upon us, but also to choose certain impressions from among them and subtract also to, you know, from them and add to them and make various combinations. He's really pointing out how complex the the human rational capacity is, and everything that has been given to everything in nature has been paired to its object in a perfect kind of way. So he's really saying, so of course we've been given this complex rational nature for a very purposeful reason. It's so that we can understand and make sense of our place here. Unlike animals who don't have that complexity, they have a very simple stimulus response style thing going on. They see food, they don't think about it, they just eat it, kind of idea. And obviously too, it's not really stated here, but in the background is the idea that, you know, a modern person could say, yeah, but animals are great, nothing wrong with animals. But really, we've been given this very complex ability to understand our relation to the world. And it's kind of in the background that we could squander that ability and we could become just like animals if we wanted to. And that would be to miss the point of being a human being.
That was literally what I was going to say. It kind of reverts us back to the animals. But back on that design, I just recently learnt that flowers give a certain frequency and bees have a certain frequency. And when the bee lands on the flower, the two frequencies kind of cancel out. And I was like, holy crap, that is firstly remarkable. But then like that in itself is really remarkable and powerful. And then if you transpose that powerfulness to our reasoning and our rationale as well, that in itself is like, hang on, this is an amazing gift that we have. We could just be going around exactly like the animals, feeding, eating, procreating, but we have been given this gift, and to use it, to not use it, yeah, you revert back to the corpse or the, you know, the undead, the corpse.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you think it promotes a sense of awe in some ways, because we've got the rational agency to be able to see, you know, it's like see that light, see that vision, you know, we can see the expansive valleys, we can see what the workmanship provides, rather than just walk past it and not notice it, because, you know, the role of an animal might just be to go and find the next bit of food, or, you know, plow the grass if we're using them for the farming and stuff.
Well, yeah, and this is part of well, there's a couple of aspects to it, but one of them is, you know, we totally take for granted things like the insects pollinating the flowers, which means we have crops, which means that we eat food. We totally take for granted all these amazing processes that are taking place all the time, whether or not we're conscious of them. And so part of Stoicism, and this is part of what Seneca is doing when he's in his natural science, is to get us to focus on these amazing cosmic events that are taking place under our noses, because partly we're so used to them, you know, we just go to work every day and we don't really see what's going on around us, but also we don't take the time or the trouble to investigate them. And so the bottom line is those two kind of factors, the fact that we're there's a taken for granted aspect and there's business with other things aspect. Both of those things conspire to hide these amazing phenomena from us unless we take the trouble to stop, reflect, and examine what's actually taking place, as I say, under our noses, and then appreciating what's involved. So I think there's a very profound set of messages from Epictetus's reflection here, and it's all too easy to forget what's literally going on so that we can eat our daily bread. But he's trying to get us to appreciate that. And also, as Charlene says, it's very easy for us to revert, in a sense, to the life of the animals, which is just get your daily bread, go to sleep, do it all again. But we have a gift which enables us to reflect, and to fail to do that would be to waste that incomparable gift.
But then there's also this tendency to be like, to be able to see the awe of nature and go, wow, that's incredible, but then completely dismiss our rationale as something that's just like, no, whatevs, you know? Like, that's why are we not going, oh my God, this is incredible, I can use rational reason, you know?
And part of it, to riff on that makes us different from animals too. And to draw back in the first part of what he says about the capacity to view each particular event in relation to the whole and sense of gratitude, is that the more you notice how amazing it is that we live in such an ordered and beautiful world, really, the more it creates this sense that you're a part of the whole, which shapes your reasoning process, so that when you meet an impression, you join with it. It's not that you have a mind separate from everything, but like the sword and the scabbard, our mind appreciates impressions as they strike the mind, and dependent on our view, our basic fundamental kind of view here, you know, the one in which we see ourselves as part of a whole, it reveals certain things to us about the natural world. If we have a view like an animal, then when we encounter an impression, it reveals animal-like aspects to us about the nature of that thing. So there's an active part in which having the right kind of attitude, having a kind of understanding of the principles that underlie what it means to be a rational being in the world, to have that as we encounter the world, causes the world to fit that view neatly. Do you know what I mean?
It's a virtuous virtuous progress, whatever the opposite is of a regress. It's a progress. So the more we perceive of the processes that are taking place, the cosmic cycles, the more we perceive those, the better we understand our place in nature. It kind of is a productive system. The more we take note of it. I just wanted to draw attention to section 18. What of the animals? God has constituted each to its intended purpose, one to be eaten, other to be used in the fields, another to produce cheese. Now we kind of think, well, okay, that's not how we see animals today, because that seems very utilitarian and subjected to human purposes. On the other hand, if we look at how we actually live our lives, you know, why do we have a dairy industry? Oh, it's to produce milk, cheese, and yogurt and butter. You know, we in actual fact, we do treat sheep and goats as if their entire purpose was to provide meat, milk, and cheese. So in a sense, I think Epictetus and the Romans were a bit more realistic than we are about how animals play a role in our lives, and we might, you know, lose sight of that because we're a bit more squeamish around how we see that.
Travis, you ready for traveling all the way to Olympia to look at the works of Phidias?
Indeed, if only. So picking up from 23, you travel all the way to Olympia to look at the work of Phidias, and all of you regard it as a misfortune to die without having seen such sights. And yet, when no journey is required and you already have the works in front of you, have you no desire then to view them and to understand them? Will you never come to recognize then who you are and what you were born for, or what is the nature of the spectacle to which you have been admitted? But unpleasant and distressing things come about in this life. And don't such things come about at Olympia? Aren't you scorched by the heat? Aren't you crowded and jostled? Don't you feel it difficult to wash? Don't you get soaked when it rains? Aren't you exposed to no end of uproar and shouting and other irritations? But by balancing all of these things off against the remarkable nature of the spectacle, I imagine that you're able to accept and endure them. Come now, haven't you been endowed with faculties that enable you to bear whatever may come about? Haven't you been endowed with greatness of soul, and with courage, and with endurance? If only I have greatness of soul, what reason is left for me to be worried about anything that may come to pass? What can disconcert or trouble me, or seem in any way distressing? Shall I fail to apply my capacities to the end for which I have received them, but instead groan and lament about things that have come about? Yes, but my nose is running. Then what do you have hands for, you slave? Isn't it to be able to wipe your nose? But is there any good reason why there should be runny noses in the world? How much better it would be for you to wipe your nose than to find fault. What kind of a man do you suppose Heracles would have become if he hadn't been for the famous lion and the hydra, the stag, the boar, and the wicked and brutal men who he drove away and cleared from the earth? What would he have turned his hand to if nothing like that had existed? Isn't it plain that he would have wrapped himself up in a blanket and gone to sleep? First of all, then, he would surely never have become a Heracles if he had slumbered the whole of his life in such luxury and tranquility. And even if he had, what good would have that been to him? What would have been the use of his arms and all of his strength, endurance, and nobility of mind if such circumstances and opportunities hadn't been there to rouse him and exercise him? What? Should he have secured such opportunities for himself then, and have sought to introduce a lion into his land for somewhere else, and a boar and a hydra? That would be sheer stupidity and madness. But since they did in fact exist and were to be found, they served a useful purpose in revealing and exercising Heracles. So come on then, now that you recognize these things, and considering the faculties that you possess, and after having done so, say, "Bring on me now, Zeus, whatever trouble you may wish, since I have the equipment that you granted to me, and such resources that will enable me to distinguish myself through whatever may happen." No, but you sit there trembling at the thought that certain things may come about, and then you cast blame on the gods. For what else than impiety can result from such meanness and spirit? And yet God has not only granted us these faculties that enable us to endure whatever may happen without being debased or crushed by it, but has also granted them to us as benefits of good King and, in truth, Father, free from all hindrance, compulsion, and restraint, placing them entirely within our own power, without reserving any power even for himself to hinder or restrain them. Possessing these faculties as you do, free and as your own, you fail to make use of them, however, and fail to perceive what it is that you have received and from whom, but sit there grieving and groaning, some of you blinded towards the giver and not even recognizing your benefactor, while others are led astray by their meanness of spirit into making reproaches and complaints against God. And yet I can show you that you have the resources and equipment that are needed to be noble-minded and courageous, while it is for you to show me what occasion you have for complaint and reproach.
I love this part. For me, this is like, what's the saying? What doesn't kill me makes me stronger, right? So everyone knows that saying, but whinges and bitches when anything gets tough. And like, especially in our line of work, we hear the complaints constantly, and it's like, don't you realize that this is your, this is your struggle, this is your obstacle, this is what makes you grow, this is what gives you your power and endurance and strength. Yet you sit there complaining and whining and whinging. So yeah, I have highlighted and everything. That's how much I love this part.
I really like the reflections on tourism in section 23, right? You go to Olympia to see the great statue of Zeus, but there's inconveniences, right? That's tourism. It's hot, it's crowded, and people are always whinging about that. They go somewhere to see a sight and then they whinge. Yep, it's like that. But as he says in 25, the nature of the spectacle, you've made a decision. This is the nature of the spectacle. That's what's involved. But also there's a side kind of reflection around, well, actually, the great sights of Olympia is one thing, but actually there are wonders of nature that you're kind of overlooking when you rush off to Olympia to see the statue of Phidias. That's the spectacle to which you've been admitted. That's a spectacle we can all appreciate all around us all the time if we view things correctly. But yeah, it's a cute reflection around the the particular kind of whinging that takes place with tourism.
And it definitely reflects that problem with desire, that it should be to some far off exotic thing in the distant future, like a longing for an unfulfilled wish, because in doing so, you miss out on what you have right now. Like, the world is full of gifts. You've got a family, you've got people around you, you've got a life, you know, you've even got your frailties and your obstacles to overcome, which is a gift in itself. And I think in Seneca's on Providence, right, he says, Demetrius, whoever the hell Demetrius is, says he feels, what is it? He feels like the unluckiest person in the world, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, is a person who's never had to experience suffering, because they never get to find out what kind of character they have. So that's a very common theme that runs through these guys. It's definitely true. Without some great adversity in our life, we will never find out what we're capable of. There's no doubt about that.
And in section 35, well, when this kind of extended reflection about Heracles, was interesting how Epictetus makes this kind of counterfactual. Well, should Heracles have introduced a lion and a boar and a hydra where they weren't already? And it's like, and it goes on to say in section 36, well, that would be sheer stupidity and madness. You know, we don't go looking for great challenges, right? They'll find us, essentially. But since they did in fact exist and were to be found, they served a useful purpose. You know, we don't go looking for disasters. That would be insane. But troubles will find us in our lives and give us an opportunity to grow and to overcome them.
Yeah, and I do like the fact too that we do have everything that we need already to handle those challenges, which is written here. But even as well, with that phrase around, you know, well, let's not be mad and go looking for these challenges. But I think it just points out to the disparity around what we will have to face. So for most of us, our challenge in life may simply be that we have a runny nose, but at the same time, some of us are also going to get called to have to do and endure some really heroic things. And if that is us, we are able to overcome them.
Yeah, totally agree, Travis. So in the sort of final sections of that chapter, and I thought it was interesting in 38 how he mentions people finding fault with the gods, you know, blaming the gods for what's happened. That's a real no-no, of course, in Stoicism, is to complain about what the gods have allocated. Rather, we need to look at it in a different way, and it's impious to look at it that way, because the gods have actually granted us the faculties, as you say, Travis, to deal with these situations. Possessing these faculties, this is section 41, possessing these faculties as you do free and on your own, you fail to make use of them. So we all have these capacities which we don't necessarily make use of. And rather, people tend to go around whinging about things all the time.
And you think about what we've been given: free from hindrance, free from all compulsion and restraint. So basically, ultimate freedom over the things that are up to us, our own selves, our own rational part, and there's a distinct absence of lack in that. So we have everything that we need in order to cope with any situation as it's given to us. And thinking about lack, that's exactly what part of the problem of desire is. Desire is the longing for something that we don't have yet. So it's kind of like a fixation on an imagined lacking, what we don't have. So there's two views at play here. There's the view that we've been given everything we need and we're not lacking in any possible way if we use our resources appropriately, or we're constantly lacking and therefore constantly desiring and constantly wishing to be somewhere else or happier or more comfortable or whatever. But we have all that all the time already within us because it's been given to us.
I'd be happy to kind of end tonight at that section. I don't know what other people feel. I mean, we did 3 sections last time, and these are 3 kind of pretty full-on sections here tonight as well. So I'm
yeah, and the
happy
next one's pretty long.
Yeah, so why don't we kind of finish off our discussion on this section?
It's a good idea. Do you guys want to just say something like a summary of what's it like to read this together, for example? Well, don't be shy. I'll go first then. I really like reading this together. I think that Stoicism, obviously it comes across as something that you can read on your own, but in the background, we're not far from Socrates, I still think, which is a dialectical exercise. So this stuff always works better as a speaker and a receiver, interlocutors, people having a conversation together. And even this, it's in the context of an older man instructing younger men about how to live well. So yeah, I really enjoy the fact that we can share it, and it feels to me more alive and more dynamic when we do it that way. So yeah, I'm enjoying it. What do you guys think?
I'm also enjoying seeing what other people pick out in the sections and, you know, their perspective on it. That I'm finding that really useful, because I'm like, oh, I'm, you know, love this section. And then like Judith went to the Olympia and tourism, and I was like, oh yeah, like I'd completely kind of like, you know, glossed over that and went, yeah, that's true. There's like so much. So it's like the nuances that other people pick up is really fascinating for me.
Yeah, I fully agree, Charlene. I get so much out of it with the group. I just love it so much. And so yeah, I did listen to the last one that you did, the first one, and so I didn't miss out. But yeah, this is marvelous. I'm really grateful that we're doing this.
Yeah, I like it a lot. As has been said, there's different parts of the text that call to us, so it's good just to have the different perspectives that are there, and also just the awareness on what you would gloss over yourself. Like I was, you know, read straight past that Olympic bit and didn't even make that connection. So it's good to have that range of viewpoints.
Yeah, no, it's been excellent, and I think there's so much in the text. You know, we can't really address all of it, but we are bringing out things that, as you say, Travis, we wouldn't necessarily notice on our own. So that's very useful.
And I just think it's wonderful too. I think us Aussies give a really good crack at it. You know, like you hear other people talk about this stuff, and they do a great job too. But I think we get into it at quite a fairly complex level, and I think that's a credit to us, and the kind of joy we've brought being able to have a group together and being able to, you know, create a kind of culture around our interest in Stoicism. I think that's really inspiring. I think that's what Stoicism probably in a part intends to do, and it's embodied in that when we come together and continue to grow and learn and support one another. I think it's great. Oh, on that happy and lofty note, are we happy to call it quits here? Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Great
Thank
to
you,
see
everybody.
you. Yeah, guys.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Have a good night.